Welcome to Whispers in the Dark. Tonight's tale drifts through the smoke of forgotten fires, where the ruins of men smolder and justice stalks in silence. This is Red Shadows. The sun had fallen low, casting long, skeletal shadows across the earth. A lonely road stretched into the wilderness, and upon it walked a single figure. His step was steady, his cloak heavy with dust, and his wide hat shielded his face from the last dying light of day. This was Solomon Kane, a wanderer, a fighter, a man bound not by gold nor by the call of kings, but by an iron vow to strike at evil wherever it rose. His boots pressed into the dirt with the certainty of a man who carried judgment itself. Yet even Kane, stern and unyielding, felt a chill that evening. The wind carried a strange scent, smoke, and something darker, something broken. At the edge of a ruined village, silence waited. No children's laughter, no women's voices. Only the blackened skeletons of houses, their frames twisted and scorched, still breathing faint trails of smoke into the twilight sky. Kane paused. His hand fell to the hilt of his rapier, the steel whispering faintly in its sheath. He stepped into the ruin. The air was heavy, like the breath of graves. Then he saw them. The villagers, what remained of them. Hollow-eyed men who clutched their wounds, mothers bent in grief. The ground itself seemed to tremble with sorrow. From their broken lips came the tale. Raiders had swept down upon them like wolves in the night. They had taken food, coin, lives, and worst of all, they had stolen a young girl, innocent, defenseless, dragged into the shadows. Her name lingered in the air like a prayer or a curse, and when Solomon Kane heard it, his jaw tightened. His eyes, hidden beneath the brim of his hat, burned with cold fire. To others, this was tragedy. To Kane, this was a summons. He turned to the weeping villagers, his voice low, carved of iron. "I will find them," he said. "I will bring her peace, and I will bring them death." The villagers fell silent. Something in Kane's words was not promise, but prophecy. They watched as he strode into the deepening woods, swallowed by shadow. The forest was alive with whispers. Branches creaked like bones, owls cried from hidden perches, and unseen creatures scuttled just beyond sight. The moon, pale and watchful, slipped between the trees, casting silver blades of light upon the path. Kane walked on, senses sharpened, hand always near his weapon. Yet in his heart stirred more than vengeance. Memories haunted him. Faces of the innocent he had failed to save, the weight of battles where justice had come too late. But tonight, he swore, would be different. Tonight, evil would not escape the edge of his blade. Somewhere ahead, raiders feasted. Somewhere ahead, a girl wept in fear. And in the darkness between, Solomon Kane walked, a silent storm gathering its strength. The hunt had begun. The night deepened as Solomon Kane pressed forward into the endless tangle of the African jungle. The moonlight thinned beneath the canopy, spilling only in fractured shafts through the branches, like pale knives cutting the dark. Every sound seemed alive. Every shadow seemed to breathe. The forest was no longer merely a wilderness. It was a living presence, ancient and hostile, watching Kane's every step. He moved carefully, the long barrel of his flintlock catching the dim light, his rapier hanging like a silent promise at his side. And then he heard it. Laughter. Not the laughter of joy, nor even of drunkenness, but the harsh, jagged laughter of men without conscience. It drifted through the trees like a poisonous mist, followed by the clash of mugs, the crackle of fire, and the cruel bark of a girl's sobs. Kane's stride slowed. His eyes narrowed beneath his hat. He crept forward, ghost-like, slipping from trunk to trunk, until at last he reached a clearing. There they were. The raiders. Savages and outcasts, their faces painted in ash and blood, sitting around a great fire. The stolen spoils of the village lay scattered at their feet. Food, coin, weapons. And among them, bound to a post, was the girl. Her face pale, streaked with tears, eyes wide with terror as the men jeered and argued over her fate. Kane's jaw hardened. He stepped into the clearing, cloak trailing behind him like a dark wing. The laughter died. All eyes turned toward him. This lone, tall figure with the hat brim shadowing his face, the glint of steel at his side, and the cold silence of judgment in his bearing. One of the raiders sneered, rising to his feet. "And what ghost walks into our fire?" he spat. Another roared, drawing a curved blade. But Kane did not flinch. His voice cut through the crackle of the flames like a blade. "Release her." For a moment there was silence. Then the Sioux, earring, erupted in mocking laughter. "Release her?" snarled a scar-faced brute. "She's ours, stranger, and soon so will you be." They rose as one, weapons glinting in the firelight. Kane moved like a storm breaking its bonds. His rapier flashed in the firelight, piercing one throat before the man could cry out. His pistol barked once, the shot shattering the night and throwing another raider lifeless to the dirt. Chaos exploded. Blades rang against steel. Men screamed. Fire scattered sparks into the sky. Kane fought with grim precision, every thrust of his rapier a sentence passed, every parry the cold hand of fate turning aside evil. But numbers weighed against him. For every man that fell, two more pressed in. They swarmed him, dragging him down, beating at him with the desperation of cornered wolves. A blow struck the back of his head. Darkness spun across his vision. His rapier slipped from his fingers, and the world fell into shadow. When consciousness returned, Kane was bound. His wrists were raw against the cords, his weapons stripped away. Around him, torches hissed and sputtered. He was no longer in the clearing, but deep within some vast cavern or temple, its walls slick with moss and carved with grim symbols. Before him loomed a great idol, the shape of a monstrous, shadowed god, its stone eyes burning with eternal hunger. Around its feet danced painted tribesmen, their voices raised in an ancient chant that seemed to shake the very air. And there, seated upon a throne of bones, was Lulu, the wolf. His eyes glimmered with savage triumph as he leaned forward, lips curled into a cruel smile. "So," Lulu hissed, "the pale avenger comes at last. You hunt me, Solomon Kane? Fool. You've walked into the den of the black god himself." The drums thundered, the fire roared higher, and Kane, bound and bloodied, stared into the face of the wolf, unflinching, as the shadows of the black god reached for him. The true horror was only beginning. The cavern shook with the pounding of drums. Firelight painted the walls in shapes that writhed like living things, twisting and bending into monstrous figures that danced in mockery of the bound man in their midst. Solomon Kane stood lashed to a great post, his arms wrenched tight, his body bruised and bloodied. Yet his gaze never faltered. He watched the mob with eyes of cold steel, refusing them even the satisfaction of his fear. Around him the tribe chanted, voices merging into a single, endless howl of madness. The sound pressed into Kane's skull, worming into his thoughts like claws scraping against stone. But louder than the chant was the crackle of the pyre being built at his feet. The black god would have his offering. Lulu, the wolf, rose from his throne of bones. His teeth flashed in the firelight, his laughter jagged and sharp. "Behold," he roared to the crowd, "the pale avenger who thought to hunt us. Now he burns beneath the gaze of the black god." The crowd screamed approval, spears thrust into the air, eyes gleaming with fanatic fury. But not all were so certain. Among them stood a figure draped in crimson robes, his face hidden, his hands marked with strange symbols. This was the Guju sorcerer, master of forgotten rites. He had once been a whisperer to kings, but now he too was bound, betrayed, cast before Cain in chains. Lulu sneered at him. "You would rival me, wizard? You would claim the black god's favor? Watch then, as he devours you too." The flames roared higher. Heat licked at Cain's legs, smoke curled into the air, stinging his eyes. And then, the impossible happened. The wizard stirred. His head snapped up, eyes glowing with a ghastly light. His body twitched, convulsed, and then, though dead moments before, he rose. His limbs moved with jerks and spasms, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle. A gasp tore through the crowd, drums altered. Spears trembled in hands suddenly slick with fear. The corpse lurched forward. Step by step, stiff and broken, it crossed the firelight, its empty eyes fixed upon the throne. Upon Lulu, upon King Songa, seated at his side. Songa shrieked, hurling his spear with trembling hands. The weapon struck true, but the dead do not bleed. The corpse staggered, then straightened, continuing its dreadful march. The crowd broke into chaos. Some fell to their knees, wailing prayers. Others clawed for the exits, their chants dissolving into panicked screams. The dead wizard reached the throne. His hands, gnarled, blackened, still stinking of death, closed upon Songa's throat. The king convulsed, his cries choking into silence as the life was wrung from him. Then, as suddenly as it had risen, the corpse collapsed into a heap of twisted limbs, lifeless once more. The fire was forgotten. The ritual shattered. All eyes turned to Lulu, whose triumphant sneer had curdled into pale terror. He barked a single order, his voice cracking with fear. "Free him! Free the Pale One!" Hands rushed to cut Cain's bonds. The mob, trembling and broken, no longer looked upon him as a prisoner, but as an omen. They whispered that the black god himself had claimed his vengeance through Cain. Solomon staggered forward, the weight of his sword once more in his hand. His eyes found Lulu, and in that gaze lay no mercy. The wolf's grin returned, though brittle and trembling. "Not here," he hissed, "not before their eyes. Meet me in the jungle, pale avenger. There we shall see whose god truly walks with him." And like a shadow, Lulu vanished into the night, fleeing the terror of the corpse and the fury of the hunter who would not rest. Cain stood amid the chaos, smoke curling around him, the whispers of the tribe fading into silence. But the black god still watched, silent, eternal, and Cain cows. How the darkest part of the journey had yet to come. The jungle lay silent beneath the moon. Its trees rose like black pillars into the night sky, their leaves whispering in voices too old for men to understand. Shadows clung to every root and branch, waiting, watching. Through that darkness ran Lulu, the wolf. His breath tore in ragged bursts from his throat, his eyes darting wildly as the memory of the walking corpse gnawed at his mind. But he was not only running, he was hunting. For he knew the pale avenger would follow, and follow he did. Solomon Cain moved through the undergrowth with relentless precision, each step measured, each breath a silent vow. His hat brim shadowed his face, his rapier gleamed faintly in the moonlight. The night air pressed heavy upon him, carrying the scent of blood, smoke, and damp earth. And beneath it all, fainter, sharper, was the musk of fear, Lulu's fear. Cain followed it like a hound upon a trail. Hours stretched into eternity. The jungle itself seemed to close around him, vines grasping like skeletal hands, branches clawing at his cloak. Yet still he pressed on, drawn by the certainty that the hunt would end in blood. At last, in a wide clearing bathed in pale moonlight, he found him. Lulu stood waiting, his curved sword gleaming, his grin sharp as a predator's. "So, pale ghost," Lulu hissed, "you chase the wolf into his own den. Now we shall see who dies beneath the eyes of the black god." Cain said nothing. He only raised his rapier, its slender point catching the moonlight. His silence was more terrible than any curse. The duel began. Steel rang against steel, the clash echoing through the trees like thunder. Lulu fought with wild fury, his blade darting like the fangs of a serpent. Cain answered with grim precision, every movement measured, every strike cold and merciless. The fight raged across the clearing. Sparks leapt where blades kissed. Footsteps churned the dahlias into dust. Their shadows whirled together beneath the moon, as if the jungle itself held its breath to witness the struggle. Lulu laughed, his voice sharp with madness. "You cannot kill the wolf, Cain. I have drunk blood, I have walked with the black god. My soul is his, and his strength is mine." But Cain's eyes never wavered. He struck, again and again, his rapier carving through the wild fury with calm inevitability. Minutes stretched into eternity. Sweat ran like blood. Muscles ached. Yet still they fought, neither yielding, neither breaking. Then, the moment came. Lulu lunged, his blade flashing for Cain's heart. But Cain twisted, turning the strike aside, and with a single, perfect thrust, drove his rapier through the wolf's chest. Lulu gasped. His grin flickered once more, then broke into a strange, hollow laughter. "You will never escape him," he whispered. "The black god waits for us all." And with that, the wolf fell, his laughter fading into silence. The jungle was still once more. Cain stood over his fallen foe, his breath steady, his blade dripping with blood. The night wind stirred the leaves, carrying away the last echoes of the wolf's defiance. Yet Cain knew this was not the end. Somewhere beyond, in the deeper dark, another shadow stirred. A greater terror awaited. And the black god's gaze had not turned away. Ye narration 9 to 10 minutes kahisa banjayega. Agar tum slow, cinematic pacing or creepy pauses use karo. Johnny, Kya Man Ab Act 5. The Final Beast. Gulka versus Giant Ape, like Kardun. The jungle held its silence as Lulu's corpse cooled beneath the moon. But Solomon Cain did not rest. His wounds burned, his breath came heavy, yet his eyes, cold, unwavering, searched the shadows. For he knew one foe yet remained, the most savage of them all. Gulka, the gorilla slayer. The trail wound deeper into the heart of the forest. The trees grew taller, their roots twisting like serpents across the ground. Strange cries echoed through the canopy. Low moans, shrill shrieks, the endless voice of the wild. And then Cain heard it. A heavy, guttural growl, followed by cruel laughter. Gulka awaited. He stepped into a clearing, his figure monstrous in the dim light. Broad shoulders gleamed with sweat, his chest scarred with old battles. In his hand he held a spear, its head still stained with the blood of beasts. His eyes gleamed with madness as they fell upon Cain. "So, the pale wanderer lives," Gulka rumbled. "You killed the wolf, but you will not kill me. I am the slayer of gorillas, stronger than man, stronger than beast. You are nothing but meat for my spear." Cain lifted his rapier, though his arm trembled with exhaustion. His face, pale and drawn, betrayed no fear. The duel began. Gulka charged with a roar, his spear lunging like lightning. Cain twisted aside, his blade flashing, but the giant's strength was overwhelming. Each strike of the spear crashed like a hammer, splintering branches, gouging earth, forcing Cain backward step by step. Still, Cain fought. His rapier darted in and out, drawing blood in thin crimson lines across Gulka's flesh. But the slayer only laughed, his teeth gleaming, his rage growing. "You cannot win!" Gulka thundered. "Even the black god fears me!" And then, the forest answered. From the shadows of the trees, a deeper roar split the night. It was a sound that shook the very earth, a bellow of ancient fury, of raw, primal pow. Or the gorilla had come. Massive, towering, its muscles rippling like black stone, the beast crashed into the clearing. Its eyes blazed with hatred, its teeth bared in a scream that drowned out the very drums of the jungle. Cain staggered back, eyes wide. For the first time, even Gulka's grin faltered. But it was too late. The gorilla lunged. Beast met Beastman in a collision that shattered the silence. Gulka's spear drove deep into the creature's shoulder, but the gorilla roared in fury, seizing the slayer in arms like iron. The jungle became an arena of titans. Trees splintered beneath their struggle. The ground quaked as they crashed against it. Gulka howled, striking with his dagger, but the beast's rage was unrelenting. At last, with a roar that shook the heavens, the gorilla crushed him. Bones snapped like twigs, screams torn short, and Gulka's body was flung broken into the trees, lifeless and forgotten. The gorilla turned then, its chest heaving, its red eyes falling upon Solomon Kane. For a moment, hunter and beast stared across the clearing. Two warriors, both scarred by violence, both bound to the dark law of survival. Then, with a final roar, the creature vanished into the jungle, leaving only silence in its wake. Cain stood alone once more. His wounds bled, his strength faltered, but his purpose burned steady. He had seen the wolf fall. He had seen the slayer crushed, yet the black god remained, watching, waiting, eternal. The jungle whispered its chant, low and mocking, carried on the wind. Whom we serve, we destroy. Whom we worship, we betray. Run if you would live, but you will never escape the shadows. Cain gathered his cloak about him, his rapier trembling faintly in his hand. And though his body longed for rest, his feet carried him onward, ever deeper into the darkness. For his war was not yet done. The jungle was quiet once more. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of something waiting. The ground still bore the scars of the titanic struggle. Trees torn apart, blood soaking the roots, the stench of death hanging heavy in the air. Gulka lay broken, his corpse sprawled among shattered branches, his name destined to vanish like smoke upon the wind. And yet, though the slayer was gone, the black god was not. Solomon Kane stood alone in that clearing. His hat shadowed his gaunt face. His cloak hung heavy with sweat and blood. His rapier trembled faintly in his grip, but his eyes, those cold, burning eyes, remained unbroken. For though he had fought men and beasts, his true enemy was neither flesh nor fang. It was the shadow that whispered from beyond. The shadow that had guided Lulu. That had given Gulka his madness. The shadow that had ruled the drums of this dark jungle since the dawn of time. The Black God. Cain lifted his gaze toward the moon. Its pale light shone like a cold blessing across the ravaged clearing. He spoke, though his voice was scarcely more than a whisper. You may claim these men, Dark One. You may command beasts and bind souls. But my path is not yours. My war is endless, and by God's grace, I will walk it until the end of time. His words vanished into the night, swallowed by the rustling of unseen leaves. Far away, drums began to sound, slow, deep, relentless. They rolled across the jungle like the heartbeat of some vast, unseen creature. Koom, koom, koom. And in that sound, Cain felt it, the gaze upon him, cold, eternal, mocking. The black god was watching still. With weary steps, Solomon Kane turned from the clearing. He gathered his cloak, sheathed his bloodied blade, and vanished into the shadows of the jungle. Behind him, the clearing remained silent, as though waiting for the next soul to wander into its hunger. The moon sank lower, the drums faded into the distance, and the whispers of the forest rose once more. The wolf had fallen. The slayer was crushed, but the black god endured. And so too did the shadow of vengeance. This was but one tale of Solomon Kane, the eternal wanderer, a man who battles not only the wicked of flesh, but the greater darkness that binds them. If the night still calls to you, then stay with us, for the shadows are far from finished.